Dr. Amna Khan is a senior lecturer in consumer behaviour and retailing at Manchester Metropolitan University, and Catherine Higgs is head of ethics, sustainability and policy at the Co-op. Welcome both, and good afternoon to you both. Catherine, it's a big piece of research this. You've questioned 10,000 shoppers. You did this research back in 1994. Why did you want to do it again?
Hi, lovely to be with you today. Like any business, we kind of constantly talk to our shoppers and our members in the case of the co-op to find out what's on their minds. But 30 years is a massive milestone, and responsible retailing kicked off a kind of strategy and a program of work at co-op that continues today. So we felt it was really timely just to kind of reach out and find out what was on everybody's mind. So really, really exciting piece of work for us to do.
Let me just bring in Amna Khan. We weren't well off, were we, in the 1990s? And yet this report has found that we are less willing now to pay more for food that is ethical and sustainable. Did that come as a surprise to you?
Yes, in the sense that many consumers actually say that they want to be more ethical and sustainable. But no, as well, because we're living in a cost of living crisis, consumers are conscious about the inflation, food inflation particularly, and how that has had an impact on household spending. But the research also suggests that the consumer can have an attitude, intention, and behaviour gap where they actually say that they want to be really ethical and then their behaviour doesn't match that. So what we've witnessed is many consumers are now talking about ethical and sustainable behaviours, but that might not translate into actually buying goods that are ethical and sustainable.
Maybe they feel they can't afford them.
I think that's the case. They can't afford them right now.
OK, Dr. Khan, back in 1994, a third of shoppers told the Co-op that they had boycotted a shop or a product on ethical grounds. That would have been the South African boycott, wouldn't it?
I'm not sure because I don't really know whether that was
Not
the
old
South
enough to remember.
Well, I was quite young then, yeah.
Well, let me tell you then as an old one, that people at the time did not buy, for example, many people South African fruit. I think it was, as I just said, a third of the shoppers. And I think I'm right in saying, Catherine, that the Co-op was the only shop, the only food shop that banned South African products.
A bit like Amna, I'm not old enough to really.
It was.
You're right.
It was.
Absolutely right. Yeah.
I think you're probably right.
Yeah, I think I am probably right. OK, I've got a number of questions like that, which probably neither of you will be able to answer. But one of the things, Catherine, that came out in that 99 questionnaire was that the top priority was animal welfare. That's slipped back a bit, hasn't it?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to kind of ask customers what their priorities are. And what we found in subsequent research is that actually there are a number of things that kind of move around the rankings and the priorities. So animal welfare, whether it's being fair to people that produce food, whether it's things like health, whether it's environment, and whether it's supporting British farmers, all of those tend to be in the kind of top priorities, irrespective of when you ask consumers.
Catherine, you found a generation gap, didn't you, when it comes to those priorities? You mentioned supporting British farmers. Buying local is more important to older people.
Yeah, what we found in our insight and research was that for older people, kind of quality is really important, and for them, kind of buying local really resonates as part of that quality piece. For younger people, there are a different set of priorities, as you'd expect. Each and every one of us has different priorities, so it's not surprising that there is a generational gap. I think what we were interested to see, and you've already talked about this, is that maybe consumers aren't as willing as they maybe were many years ago to pay more for ethically sourced foods. But I think the situation and the market has changed massively since 1994. And as a consumer myself, I kind of expect ethical and well-sourced products to be the norm. And I suspect a lot of our members feel like that as well.
Amna Khan, how would you explain it, the fact that younger people don't seem so bothered about shopping local?
Well, you have to remember that the younger consumer, maybe the Gen Z consumer, is highly digital. They spend a lot of their time digitally, and the perspective of, local might not appeal to them in the same way because for them, when they get online, the whole world is there. They make friendships there, social interactions there. So they might not be that connected to the local perspective in the same way. Another thing that I wanted to pick up on is the fact that the Gen Z consumer, the younger consumer, might be more conscious about how they spend their money, because that's what we've witnessed, that consumers are a bit more prudent when it comes to how they spend their money. So that might be the key difference as well. Whereas the older generation might be quite happy to pay for locally produced goods that are maybe a bit more expensive, better quality, whereas the Gen Z consumer, they've come into a world where fast fashion is the norm, buying things cheap is the norm, they've got less money to spend. So all of these things come into play.
Catherine, the other thing that is in this report, apart from the generation gap, is the business of labelling. That was the number one priority back in 1994, again, really high up. The thing the Co-op promised to do is make its labels clearer. The ports were being blockaded then in protest against the live export of calves and sheep. I mean, that's only just been totally banned, the live export of all animals. What has been achieved there? A lot, I'm guessing, labelling.
Yeah, when I first, so I should say, when I first joined the Co-op in 1997, so I do remember lots of these things happening, and labelling was an absolute priority. But again, it reflected what we found at the time was that generally labelling just wasn't very good across the board. And I think Co-op and a number of other businesses and influential kind of stakeholders were kind of really, really pushing this. And I think, we were one of the first businesses to put nutrition labelling that consumers could understand on labels. So we used the terms high, medium and low, which is what you expect to see now. But back in the day, that was really, really radical.
So that's a battle won to a certain extent. Catherine Higgs, Dr. Amna Khan, thank you both for that.